At Fairfax Academy, Prestige had a uniform, and Lucas Reed wasn't wearing it. While students prepared for their mock SATs, he scrubbed away chalk dust from formulas he once pioneered. No one knew. No one cared. But when a physics teacher made a cruel joke at his expense, and a scholarship student caught the flicker of genius behind his silence, everything began to shift. A dusty Princeton lanyard, a name almost erased, and a truth too powerful to stay hidden much longer. Lucas Reed moved like breath through the early corridors of Fairfax Academy, unnoticed and inevitable. The building, with its marble floors and oil portraits of dead benefactors, still slept under low fluorescent light. He pushed his janitor's cart without hurry, hands wrapped in thin cloth gloves, shoulders steady, gaze downward. The mop in his right hand made soft strokes along the edge of the physics lab door. He paused, tilted his head, and with practiced ease reached into the side pocket of his uniform to retrieve a ring of keys, none of which he used. The door was already ajar. Inside, the lab buzzed with silence. Long tables stood in rows like dormant chessboards. On the whiteboard, yesterday's chalked equations, angular momentum, kinetic formulas, still lingered like ghosts. Lucas walked up to the board and stared for a moment too long. His fingers hovered. Then, wordlessly, he erased each symbol with long, even sweeps, pausing only at one strange-looking derivative. It was wrong. Sloppy. He didn't fix it. He erased it anyway. As he wiped down the lab benches, a breeze of giggles echoed down the hallway. The students were coming. Lucas set the last stool in place and backed into the shadowed corner near the sink. Emily Vargas entered first, her backpack slightly unzipped, a physics prep book tucked under one arm. She scanned the room like someone walking into a courtroom instead of a classroom. Her eyes flicked to Lucas, just briefly, and then returned to her phone. Behind her came the usual echo of legacy. Brannigan, Preston, Carrington, sons and daughters of names carved into stone somewhere on campus. James Brannigan trailed in with a latte cup and mock fatigue. God, if I have to memorize one more formula, I'm just going to donate a new science wing and be done with it, he said, to a wave of obliging chuckles. Emily took a seat near the front, quietly pulling out a notebook. She looked up as Lucas passed near the side cabinet, adjusting a bin of test tubes. A small piece of fabric shifted beneath his uniform, just enough for her to glimpse it. A lanyard, faded navy, Princeton. She blinked, but the moment was gone. The lanyard disappeared behind the zip of his coveralls, and Lucas returned to his cart. Then came the sound of heels. Dr. Elisa Hamont entered like weather. Her white blazer was crisp, her hair pulled back so tightly it threatened the contours of her forehead. Without a word, she walked to the board, uncapped a marker, and wrote, QOT equals PSIX, comma T, plus IH, partial differential psi, / partial differential T. She turned to the class. Today, we stretch. James raised his hand. Stretch like yoga, or stretch like we pretend we understand this and then move on? More laughter. Dr. Hamont smiled with icy teeth. Stretch like we pretend we don't expect the janitor to know it better than we do. Lucas was wiping the back counter. He stopped. Briefly, the class burst into laughter again. Emily's lips tightened. She looked at Lucas, really looked. His grip on the cloth was firm, knuckles pale under brown skin, but his face remained neutral. Too neutral. Dr. Hammond tossed the marker onto the tray. Well, Mr. Reed, she called. Any insight? Lucas didn't turn. He set the cloth down, straightened the spray bottle, and walked out. The door closed behind him with a quietness that somehow felt louder than the joke. The bell rang an hour later. The students filed out, some still chuckling, some oblivious. Emily lingered. Lucas was back in the hallway, sweeping near the lockers. She approached him slowly. Mr. Reed, she said, keeping her voice low, the equation on the board, did you recognize it? Lucas didn't look up. He turned the mop once, then paused. I used to, he said softly. Emily didn't respond. She stepped back, pulled out her phone, and opened the photo she'd snapped earlier in class, zoomed in on the whiteboard. The equation. The subtle correction made halfway through. Not part of Hamont's handwriting. Not standard high school fare, either. Far too clean. Far too elegant. Back in her dorm room, under a cracked reading lamp, Emily scrolled through online databases, trying to match the equation. Down the hallway, Lucas rolled his cart toward the janitor's closet. The mop leaned like a tired limb. The lanyard, hidden again, moved once with the turn of his body, and went still. The library at Fairfax Academy was nearly empty by 9:30 p.m., save for the rhythmic clack of Emily Vargas's keyboard and the occasional creak of the building settling into silence. Outside, a thin drizzle painted the windows in glistening streaks. Inside, the overhead fluorescence flickered with that tired hum she had learned to ignore. She wasn't typing notes. On her screen, split side by side, were two images: a blurry photograph she had snapped of Dr. Hamlin's whiteboard earlier that morning, and a PDF she had stumbled upon through a password-protected academic archive. The title of the paper read, "Nonlinear Probabilistic Models in Quantum Systems." Author, L.A. Reid. Emily zoomed in. The notation was nearly identical. More than that, it was identical. The slant of the Greek sigh, the spacing around the partial differential, even the way the author had scratched a line through an early error in the derivation. It was handwriting only a physicist could read, and only one man at Fairfax had written it that day. She sat back. Her heart wasn't racing. It was steady, cold. Lucas Reed. The janitor. No one had ever said his full name out loud. Most students didn't know it. She'd seen it on a clipboard once, maybe, or heard Miss Hollins mutter it under her breath. Emily stood, gathered the printouts and her laptop, and headed down the back stairs toward the archives. She paused outside the faculty reading room, closed for the night, but through the glass, a single desk lamp remained on. Inside, Miss Denise Hollins sat hunched over a worn book, eyes hidden behind round glasses, one hand absent-mindedly stroking the edge of the page. Emily knocked gently. Miss Hollins looked up without surprise. "Curiosity," she said, not unkindly, "can be exhausting." "I think Mr. Reed is L.A. Reid," Emily said bluntly, holding out the printed article. Miss Hollins didn't take it. She looked past it, through the glass. Then said, "Some truths don't need to be proven, but they often demand to be remembered." "Is it him?" Miss Hollins leaned back. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because she mocked him," Emily said, her voice sharper than expected. "In front of all of us." There was a pause. Finally, the librarian spoke. "Find the letters. They're not in databases, but they're somewhere." Emily stepped back, uncertain. "Try the donor archive," Miss Hollins added quietly. "Bottom drawer, behind the plaque cases." At the same hour, in the far wing of the school, Lucas opened a drawer in his janitor's closet. It hadn't been touched in years. Dust clung to the corners, like cobwebs guarding history. He knelt, pulled out a cracked leather folder, and placed it gently on the small utility counter beside the mop sink. Inside were yellowing documents, stapled, annotated, precise, letters of recommendation. A faded photo of him in a lab coat, arms folded, standing beside a whiteboard crammed with equations. Another photo, blurred, of a younger Walter Hammett grinning beside him. And the envelope. He opened it with steady hands. Inside, the words stared back at him. Wolf Prize in Physics. Nomination acknowledged. 2001. Dr. Lucas A. Reed. Affiliation. MIT Department of Quantum Mechanics. He held it in his hands for a long time, then folded it back into its envelope, resealed the folder, and tucked it into the back of the drawer. He locked the closet, slid the key into his pocket, and stood very still. Emily sat on the floor of the archive hallway, a pile of unsorted materials around her. The carpet smelled like dust and forgotten ambition. Finally, tucked between old yearbooks and a metal case labeled Physics Department, 1998 to 2000, she found it. Another printout of the same paper. Handwritten annotations in the margins. A post-it stuck to the top corner. To Walter, draft in progress. Don't share yet. LR. Her breath caught. She didn't sleep. At 2:13 a.m., she emailed the scanned article and photo to Ms. Hollins with one line. "This is him, isn't it?" 3 dots appeared in the reply box, then vanished. No message came. At 6:52 the next morning, Lucas stood alone in the back of the empty physics classroom. He held a piece of white chalk between two fingers. The morning sun had not yet reached the building's east windows. On the board, a basic mechanics problem left unsolved the day before. Lucas lifted the chalk slightly, paused. His hand hovered, trembled. Then he lowered the chalk and erased the board clean with one long, silent stroke. "Perhaps Mr. Reed can enlighten us," said Dr. Elisa Hammond, her tone dancing somewhere between sarcasm and command. "After all, he spent more time in this lab than anyone." The words fell lightly, but the silence that followed was sharp. Emily Vargas looked up from her notes, startled. Her eyes locked on Lucas. He had just entered to collect a waistband near the back counter. He paused, not long, just a breath, and then bent down to lift the bag as if nothing had been said. Laughter trickled through the classroom. James Brannigan snorted. "I bet he thinks Newton's 3 laws are traffic regulations," he muttered. More laughter, louder this time. Lucas didn't turn. Emily's heart pounded, not out of fear, but certainty. Something was about to shift. The image of the research paper she'd printed the night before flickered behind her eyes. The name at the top, Dr. Lucas A. Reed. The equation, the handwriting, the quiet grace of intellect. It all pointed back to the man holding the trash bag like it weighed more than plastic. The classroom buzzed again. Dr. Hammond stepped to the whiteboard, uncapped a marker, and wrote in tall, firm letters, HX, T, psi equals IH, partial differential psi / partial differential t. "This," she said, "is a classic formulation. Unfortunately, your mock scores indicate it's also a mystery." She turned. "But perhaps Mr. Reed might offer us some clarity." "Lucas?" The room tensed. Chairs creaked. No one moved. Lucas straightened. His gaze remained low. Then, slowly, he walked to the front of the classroom. Not hurried, not hesitant, just present. When he reached the board, Dr. Hammond stepped aside, her posture stiff, her eyes narrowed in curiosity and disdain. Lucas took the marker in his right hand. No one spoke. He stood still for several seconds. Then, with movements both deliberate and fragile, he began to write. Psi t equals psi asterisk express, IHT chi. Emily sat forward in her chair. She recognized the notation. But it wasn't just the solution, it was the elegance of it. The way the marker glided, the symmetry in his spacing. Every gesture reminded her of the annotations in the research article. This wasn't rote memory, it was fluency. Like a pianist returning to a long-abandoned melody and finding his fingers knew it better than his mind did. At first, the students chuckled awkwardly. Then they stopped. Lucas kept going, expanding the solution, building out the logic. One line became 3, then 5, then more. His hand moved faster, smoother. He corrected an error in the original setup, then built on it, adapting the question into a proof neither expected nor intended. Dr. Hammond took a small step back. Her arms crossed, her jaw tightened. Emily couldn't look away. Her pulse thrummed like a bass drum in a quiet room. She glanced down at the printout folded in her backpack. The same symbols, the same progression, now blooming on the board in real time. James leaned over to whisper something but stopped mid-sentence. No one was laughing now. Lucas reached the end of the whiteboard and paused. He looked at the sequence, then added one last notation. An extension, something extra, something original. He set the marker on the tray, turned to face them, and spoke. "Funny thing about equations," he said, voice steady, quiet. "They don't care who solves them." Then he walked out. The door didn't slam. It didn't need to. Dr. Hammond remained still. Emily looked from the door to the board, then back to the marker. She rose from her seat and stepped forward. With careful fingers, she picked up the marker Lucas had left behind. She turned it in her hand. There, just like in the margin of the article, was a small, curved loop at the end of his capital R, a signature flourish, subtle, consistent. Emily blinked hard. Behind her, a classmate whispered, "What the hell just happened?" She didn't answer, because she already knew. Rain tapped steadily against the tall windows of the Fairfax Academy boardroom. each drop a soft percussion against glass and time. Inside, the lights flickered overhead, casting pale reflections onto the polished table. Along the far wall, a row of stern portraits stared down, founders of the Academy, all framed in oil and power. Emily Vargas stood at the head of the room, fingers trembling slightly as she unrolled the printed document across the mahogany surface. Around her sat a semicircle of board members, some engaged, others distant behind reading glasses and laced fingers. She cleared her throat. "This is an academic paper published in 1998 in the Journal of Quantum Applications," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "The author is listed as Dr. L.A. Reed. I believe this is the same Lucas Reed who currently works in our custodial staff." A few raised eyebrows. One quiet cough. Emily reached into her folder. "This," she said, laying down a second sheet, "is a handwriting sample from the whiteboard during last week's physics class. This is a sample from the paper's original draft, found in our archives. They match." Silence. She placed one final page on the table. "And this is a 2001 nomination acknowledgement from the Wolf Prize Committee, addressed to Dr. Lucas A. Reed, then affiliated with MIT. A low hum rose from the group. Chair legs shifted. One man leaned forward, peering through bifocals. "Is this authenticated?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't have to. At the far end of the room, the door opened. Ms. Denise Hollins stepped in, holding a single sheet of paper. She nodded once at Emily, then handed the page to Principal Harlan. He unfolded it slowly, reading with growing tension in his brow. "It's a sworn statement," Ms. Hollins said. "From Dr. Michael Kerner, a former lab assistant. He confirms that Lucas Reed was the original author of the quantum modeling theory attributed to Walter Hammond in 2001. A rustle of reaction swept the room. Principal Harlan stood and smoothed his tie. "I think it's time we invited Mr. Reed in." Lucas entered without fanfare. He wore the same gray uniform. His shoes were wet at the soles. In one hand, he carried a plain manila folder. He approached the table with calm that didn't demand attention, but refused to be dismissed. Without a word, he laid the folder in front of Principal Harlan. Inside were copies of his doctorate diploma, his faculty ID from MIT, the Wolf nomination letter, and a faded photo from a 1997 conference where he had presented his quantum theory to a panel of peers. No one spoke. Then Lucas looked up. "You've built a place," he said, voice low but clear, "where value is measured by how someone speaks, dresses, or where their parents went to school. You taught your students to see worth only in voices that sound like yours." One board member, a woman in her 60s, lowered her gaze. "I didn't speak up because I thought I could outlast the lie," Lucas continued. "But silence doesn't erase truth. It just buries it under noise." At that moment, the door slammed open. Dr. Hammond stormed in, blazer damp from rain, eyes sharp with fury. "This is outrageous," she snapped. "You're being manipulated. There is no way to verify any of this without months of forensic analysis. These could be forgeries. This could be a stunt." Lucas didn't flinch. "This isn't about you," he said, voice unwavering. "This is about truth." For a moment, the only sound was the rain, still tapping against glass like a ticking clock. Principal Harlan, standing stiff at the end of the table, took a long breath. "We'll need to speak with the board urgently." Emily remained in the room after the others left, standing beside Miss Hollins. "Do you think they'll believe him?" she asked. Miss Hollins didn't answer. She simply looked at the empty chair where Lucas had sat, then up at the portraits of the founders. "Depends," she said at last, "on whether they're ready to make room for a new face on that wall." The Fairfax Academy auditorium had never felt so still. Morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting fractured color across the seated faculty, trustees, and students. Dust danced slowly in the beams, suspended like breath held in a crowded room. Lucas Reed stood center stage. No mop, no uniform. Just a navy blazer over a plain shirt, and the worn posture of a man more comfortable in shadows than spotlights. But today, he stood in the light. "I spent 22 years here," he began, "not as your colleague, not even as your equal. I swept under the feet of the very people I once trained." A rustle moved through the audience. Lucas's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Each syllable landed like weight on glass. "I was 27 when I was nominated for the Wolf Prize in Physics," he said. "My theory was stolen by someone with a better name and better connections. When I spoke up, I was discredited, silenced. My credentials vanished from databases. My name became an embarrassment no one wanted to defend." In the front row, Emily Vargas sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Beside her, Miss Hollins stared straight ahead, lips parted slightly, eyes glossy. Lucas continued. "But this isn't about me anymore. You've heard the story. You've seen the evidence. You can choose to make amends, or you can choose to keep pretending." He stepped forward, pausing beside a projection screen. A slide blinked to life. Red initiative, research, equity, discovery. Lucas turned toward the assembly. "I'm proposing a new program," he said. "One that identifies and mentors students from underserved backgrounds with potential in science, regardless of pedigree. I call it the Red Initiative." Murmurs rippled through the rows. "It won't cost you pride," he said, "but it will cost you money. I propose reallocating a portion of the unused legacy fund and the Hammond Endowment to launch the first decade of the program." All heads turned, some shocked, some impressed. Dr. Hammond, seated near the aisle, shifted in her seat. Her arms were crossed tightly, her jaw set, but she didn't speak. Lucas scanned the crowd. "This academy built walls with names," he said. "Names that opened doors for some and closed them for others. I know, because I scrubbed those doors." A pause. Then, "You built a wall with the same bricks that once kept me out. I'm asking you to rebuild something better." He stepped back, folding his hands in front of him. Silence. Then Principal Harlan rose, slowly, from his seat on the edge of the stage. He looked across the auditorium, at students whose eyes didn't look away, at faculty whose hands fidgeted with old assumptions. Then he said, "The board has voted unanimously to approve the proposal." Gasps, applause, not raucous, but rising, like the start of something. Emily turned to Ms. Hollins, who still hadn't moved. A single tear had slipped down her cheek. She whispered, almost to herself, "Took you long enough, Reed." Lucas, still on stage, gave a slight nod. Not of triumph, but of release. As if the weight of invisibility had finally loosened its grip. The red lab smelled of fresh paint and sanded wood, with a quiet current of electricity humming through brand new outlets. Glass cabinets gleamed. Workbenches stood in ordered rows. On one wall, above a black matte display board, lined with student projects, a small golden plaque caught the morning light, in honor of Dr. Lucas A. Reed. For all the things left unsaid, and all the voices still waiting. Outside, the snow fell thick and soft, blanketing the lawns of Fairfax Academy in silence. Inside, Emily Vargas stood beside a poster board presentation, her hair pulled back, voice calm but confident, as she explained their quantum computing model. At her side was James Brannigan, now stripped of his smirk, nodding quietly and deferring without complaint. At the center of their project was Talia Brooks, a freshman whose sharp eyes never left the diagrams. When she spoke, her voice quivered, but her math didn't. Lucas Reed watched from the back of the lab, not as supervisor, not as director, just as presence. The students didn't defer to him out of reverence. They came to him out of curiosity. Emily caught his gaze and smiled, not the kind that asked for approval, but the kind that said, "We built this, together." Later, Lucas returned to his small office at the rear of the lab. The light was low. Outside, flakes of snow drifted against the window like ash in slow motion. On his desk sat a sealed envelope. No note, no signature. He opened it. Inside, a resignation letter from Dr. Elisa Hammond, typed, dated, final. Beneath it, folded neatly, a copy of the original article he had written decades earlier. The credit line still read, "Dr. Lucas A. Reed." There was nothing else. He set it aside. Talia knocked on the doorframe. "Dr. Reed?" He looked up. She held out a piece of notebook paper, lined, slightly crumpled. He took it gently and read the single line. "I want to be a physicist." He looked at her. "You already are." She smiled and slipped out. Alone again, Lucas stood and walked out into the center of the lab. The snow's reflection cast a soft blue light across the white floors. He looked up at the plaque, then at the students working in small groups. Laptops open, equations scribbled on glass panels, voices low and focused. He'd once stood in a room like this, in another city, under another name. Only this time, the room was his, and it was open to anyone. A visiting journalist hovered near the entrance. She waited until the tour group passed, then approached him hesitantly. "Dr. Reed," she asked, "how did you survive all these years?" Lucas looked at her for a moment, then smiled, not wide, but steady. "Equations," he said, "aren't the only things you solve in silence." Outside, the snow thickened. Lucas stepped through the front doors and onto the white path. There was no applause, no fanfare, only the soft crunch of his steps as he walked into the winter morning. The air was cold, but his breath was light. Justice had come, not with a roar, but with the quiet certainty of a solved equation, complete and irreversible. The snow had long since covered the paths outside, but inside the lab, something had quietly taken root. Lucas never asked for applause, just space, so others wouldn't have to disappear to be heard. His legacy wasn't carved in marble, but in the quiet confidence of students who now saw science as a door, not a wall. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It arrives in footsteps that no longer retreat. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it with someone who once stood silent, but never stopped believing.